Hi guys, it's Nicole here from the Little Craft House. Today I thought I would bring you along with me while I had a bit of a making session as I'm making a polymer clay slab for Halloween earrings. So if you'd like to see how I make these cuties, stick around and I'll show you how. For this project I'm going to be using some black and white polymer clay, some Premo Wasabi and Orange for just that pop of colour, and I'm also going to be using some leaf foil. This one is in a beautiful purple colour. The tools that I'm going to be using is a heart-shaped cutter, a dotting tool, and then my normal items such as my knife, my flexi-blade, my roller, and I'm working on a tile. Later on, I'll also need some earring findings when I'm assembling my earrings. So to start with, I'm going to use my white clay. Recently, me and white have not been friends. I keep getting it really dirty. So I'm going to condition it using my hands and my acrylic roller, and I'm not going to pass it through the machine at the moment. I'm also going to just work on the white elements first, and so that's going to help stop any colour transfer. Once it's conditioned enough, I'm going to roll it thin, not super thin, but it's going to be layered on my piece. So I don't want it to be too thick and become too heavy. So the secret for making the perfect flying ghosts is to bring out my heart cutter. So if you saw my cutter hacks video last week, you would have seen my little trick for making these flying ghosts. I spent quite a bit of time with trial and error trying to find the perfect cutter shape to get the shape that I wanted, and I found that the heart-shaped worked the best. So if you didn't catch the last tutorial that I posted here on YouTube, after you finish watching today's episode, go back and watch that one because there's other tips and tricks in there for Halloween earrings too. Okay, so back to these ghosts. I've cut the hearts in half and then I've just used my tissue blade to scrape them up from the tile so that it doesn't distort them. And now the next stage takes a little bit of time. I need to reshape them. So I need to round off the head and then I need to shape the tail a little bit more rounded so it looks like they are flying. I also like to smooth the edges of the shape at this stage too, as once it's layered onto our slab, there's not going to be an opportunity for them to get sanded later on. So they need to be as smooth as possible now. As I mentioned before, and you probably already know, white clay likes to pick up every bit of dirt, dust, lint, pet hair, anything like that that's going around. So my biggest tip with working with white clay is to keep everything as clean as possible. If your clay does require cleaning, you can always use a tiny bit of isopropyl and a Q-tip to help remove any of the little dirt that may happen to stick to your clay. Okay, now that I've finished shaping up my ghosts, it's time to do the faces. And I'm going to use my dotting tool to indent and mark where I want the eyes and the mouth to go on each of the little ghosts. Now, for some reason while I was filming this, I decided to only do the dotting part and not fill the faces with the black clay at the moment. I'm not quite sure why I did that. Maybe it was to stop the transfer of the black clay. Not really sure, but we'll just roll with it and I'll come back and do those faces properly afterwards. Until then, I'm just going to pop them all onto a piece of baking paper and move them to the side whilst we work on the next bit. So we're going to start working on the base of this clay slab. This is Premo Black that I'm using today. I always recommend using a good, strong quality clay for your base, such as Premo or Soufflé, even Fimo or Cernit. A good clay reduces the risk of cracking and gives you a quality product in the end. Now my clay is currently rolled out to about 4mm thick, and I'm going to use my slab square here, which is a bit like a depth guide, to give you an even, consistent thickness to my slab. This will take it down to approximately 3mm. But before I do that, I am going to place on this piece of foil. The foil is very thin, so I have to be super careful. And once it touches the clay, it will just stick. So it's not going to be able to be moved. I'm going to gently then smooth the foil onto the clay just to help it bond nicely and push out any air bubbles. It also feels really, really nice. Now I'm going to roll it down to that thinner 3mm thickness. Not sure how easy it is for you to be able to see, but as I'm rolling, the clay is stretching and it's making the foil crack. The thicker your clay is to start with, the more cracking effect that you're going to get. So just remember to roll the clay in each direction to keep the clay level. Any of those overhanging bits of foil can be kept for later on, so I like to just pull those bits off and pop them back into the paper for safekeeping and use it later. If you haven't come across this foil before, it's definitely well worth looking into. It's like a gold leaf foil, but this is obviously coloured. It can be used in all sorts of artwork, and I love using it on my polymer clay. So I'm going to remove the guide now and just take the clay down a little bit further, just trying as hard as I can just to keep it even. Because my final piece is going to be layered, I don't want it to be too thick and heavy. So just by taking it down slightly thinner, it's just going to reduce that heaviness. Look at that crackle. How good does that look? Okay, so back to our little ghosts. I'm going to start placing them onto the base. I am a little bit indecisive of where to start. I'm not sure if I've even made enough ghosts to fill this slab, but that's okay. I'll start from the corner and then work outwards. I want to keep them pretty close together so that when I cut my final earring shapes at the end, I get a few of the ghosts in each of them. Now, an alternative to doing the slab and randomly placing them, what I could do is take my cutter and put an indent in. Then I would know where the shapes are going to go and I would be able to position them into that. But I don't want to do that today. I'm just going to do my random slab. So I want them to be on different angles and a little bit random. I don't want my final pieces to be symmetrical and matching exactly. I like the more random look. And so I'm just pressing them down lightly to hold them in place, but I'll be able to lift them up and reposition them if I need to. At the end, I'll press them down again just to make sure that they have bonded with the base clay, and that'll be enough once they're baked to hold them on permanently. Okay, and so back to the faces. I'm going to use some more of the black clay that I had and roll some thin strands. I'll then cut some little tiny bits off and I'll make them into little balls and pop them into the indents that I made earlier for those faces. Now, I'll be honest, this is quite fiddly and time-consuming task. If you prefer, you could always use a Posca paint pen or another sort of paint marker to just paint those faces on if you'd prefer. And I'm just going to grab my little dotting tool again and push those features down and into those little indents properly so that they don't pop out. Now for the pop of colour. Don't get me wrong, I love that shiny purple in the background, but I feel like it just needs something a little bit extra. So I'm going to use some Premo Orange and some Wasabi. I feel like they are the perfect complementing Halloween colours. Now I'm not going to be using much of each of these colours, so I'll just chop off a little tiny bit and quickly condition them with my fingers. So usually if I'm adding a small amount of colour like this, I try and use up some scrap clay or mix some scraps together to create the perfect colour. But I actually, believe it or not, I didn't even have any green or orange scraps lying around. I usually have every colour, but not today. So I had to open new packs up. So I've rolled the colours into some strands, and I'm just going to chop off some pieces that are around the same size, and then I'm going to roll them into some little balls. I actually don't want these to be perfect, so I'm happy for them to be slightly different in sizing and slightly different in their shape. I'll prepare quite a few because even if I don't use them all at this stage, once my pieces are cut out for the earrings, I may find that they've got some gaps and some spaces in them and I'll need to use them then. And so I'm just going to work with both the knife and the ball tool to move the pieces into position that I want, and then use the ball tool to push them down and secure them to that base clay. Now comes the most important and probably the most stressful part, and that is cutting out my pieces. So I've gone with a simple circle shape as I want to be able to get as much of the ghosts in on each piece as I can. Because I hadn't fully pushed down each of the ghosts into position yet, it does give me the ability to be able to move them if I need to. Once I'm happy with the cutout piece, I'll then make sure that I remember to reapply a bit of pressure to secure all the bits in place properly. I'll work on that other side afterwards, as I'm going to need to find another shape to fit in, as I'm not going to be able to get another 2 circles out of it. From this edge over here though, I'm going to cut out a couple of circles which are going to be my earring toppers. This way they're going to be coordinating, but I'm not going to have to worry about fitting the little ghosts onto those. And I'll just use my flexi-blade to scrape up my pieces and release them from the tile. As usual, I like to run my fingers around the edges of the pieces just to neaten them up, because the more you do now means less sanding later. And as I mentioned before, there's a few little gaps, so I'm just going to fill them up with some of those little leftover dots. It's funny because as a full slab, it didn't look like there was any gaps there, but now they're cut out, I can see there's just bits that just need those little touches of the colour. So I've baked my pieces and I've now began sanding around the edges. Giving them a quick sand will help to clean up any of the little drag marks that happened when we pushed the cutter down, and it'll also take off any sharp bits that may have been left over on the edges. So I'm not sure how clearly you can see it here, but the top one has been sanded and the bottom one isn't. It's only subtle, but I really think it does make a difference by sanding off those extra bits. For sanding, I use my Dremel drill with a buffing attachment. It's a bit like a felt tip, so it's quite soft and it's not abrasive on the clay. I just run it around the sides and the bottom of the edge to smooth it off. So this is just me demoing. I can't show you for real because not only is it noisy, it's dusty, and I do it away from my creating table so I don't get the dust on my raw polymer clay. Now I do apologise for my filming technique here. I'm supposed to be showing you how I'm assembling, but for some reason it's out of shot. So while I'm not on screen, I'll talk about drilling. So I use my Dremel drill for drilling the holes too, and I drill after baking. Now I've got a little secret for drilling raised pieces like this. You need to turn your pieces over and drill from the back. This will reduce the risk of the drill bit slipping. It also helps to stop the pattern from distracting you from your placement of your hole, because sometimes you try not to drill through, say, like the little ghost head, but then that actually puts out your drill mark and it means that your pieces aren't going to be even and hang evenly. Okay, so back to assembling. I like to use 2 pairs of pliers when I'm doing my jump rings. I've got one pair that's round nose and one pair that's flat nose. You want to avoid putting pressure on your polymer clay pieces as much as possible, as that will result in snapping your piece. And for the purpose of the video, I'm assembling my pieces first and then I'm going to glue the backs on later, but that's totally up to you if you want to glue the backs on and then assemble them properly. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed watching me create this little collection, and I hope that you've picked up some tips and tricks along the way. Please don't forget the usuals. Likes and subscribes are always appreciated. And if you're interested in seeing more from me, also head over and check out my Instagram. I post daily tutorials and inspiration over there as well. So thank you once again for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.